So this is true for every seed producer or anybody saving seed. They're the only person in the world that's going to save seed for their exact soil type and climate, but also their management style and what inputs they put in and what they hope to get out of the crop, what they see as valuable in the crop. And so, yeah, for us, that's actually become the primary reason that we're now saving seeds, is that we just see the best results from the seed we save.
Welcome to episode 51 of the Seed Farmer Podcast, the podcast where I want you to harvest seeds from some of the vegetables and flowers growing in your farm or garden, and then to plant that seed out to grow delicious vegetables and beautiful flowers. If you enjoy the Seed Farmer Podcast and find it to be a good resource that helps you improve your seed work and farming, please support the show at spreadsheet.farm/support-podcast. I'm your host, Dan Brisebois, seed grower at Turnip Cooperative Farm and author of The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seeds. Today, we've got a conversation about growing seeds as part of your market garden. But first, some news. So, Seedy Saturday season has just begun. Seedy Saturdays are events that take place across Canada, and they can actually take place on different days of the week, but initially they were Seedy Saturday, and that's how I think of them in my head. And these are kind of like farmers markets that pop up in communities all over, and they're one-day events or sometimes two-day events. And at these events, there will usually be at least one seed vendor, but sometimes 3 or 4, and maybe even a dozen or 2 seed vendors, depending on how big the city or town. Because these do happen in small towns, and they also happen in big cities like Montreal or Toronto or Vancouver. And so the larger ones tend to have more vendors. And in addition to that, there'll be seed swaps, and there'll be community organizations and gardening and farming type stuff, and usually workshops, and usually they're free to attend. Having these Seedy Saturdays in Canada has really supported a small seed movement and made it easier to start a small seed company. Because really what you need to do is you need seeds in an envelope that are labeled in some kind of bin or rack, and you can show up, and then you can be behind your stall like at a farmer's market, and you can sell seeds that way. And that's how we started in 2006 or 2007. I think it was 2006. We started that way with, 24 different varieties in, they weren't hand labeled, but they were craft envelopes, white craft envelopes. Maybe actually, I think they were like those yellow craft envelopes with an Avery label printed and slapped on it. And we had like 24 varieties, and, we started off going to Seedy Saturdays that way, and that began our direct-to-customer seed sales. And it's kind of scaled from there. So this is not a unique thing. Anyway, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. Just to say, Seedy Saturday season has begun. And when this goes live, we'll have just attended 2 Seedy Saturdays, and I'll be getting ready to go to the Montreal Seedy Saturday, which takes place on a Friday and a Saturday at Cégep à Huntsic. And we're going to go and see a bunch of customers. And it's always an exciting place. One, it's exciting because, you're selling the product. You're selling the seeds that you worked on all year and are packed up. And that's exciting. But it's also a chance to meet the gardeners who are going to use these seeds and see the people whose gardens these crops go into. And it's just really exciting. And it always gets me just really pumped up and helps me ground myself in why I do this work, or one of the reasons I do this work. So Seedy Saturday season has begun. Another news item, here's something I read in the Freed Seed Federation newsletter on February 10. There's a winter class offering botany of seed formation as it relates to seed saving in the garden. It's taught by Freed Seed's senior scientist, Hannah Tragus. This will be a great class for those of you who have attended seed school in the past and are looking to dive deeper into plant biology in person at the Westport Grange and virtually via Zoom. Free, no registration required. So I'll post the link to this Freed Seed event in the show notes so you can go there. And now let's get into today's conversation. Shannon Jones runs Broadfork Farm with Bryan Dyck in River Hebert, Nova Scotia. They grow vegetables and cut flowers for market. I've been trying to get Shannon on the podcast since the beginning of this podcast, because Broadfork is a great example of how a market farm can integrate seed production into the vegetable and flower fields. And Shannon and I have finally found a time that worked for us to have a conversation kind of in that space between end of season and, winter stuff. In this episode, Shannon shares how she and Bryan choose the seed crops they grow and how they manage seed harvest through the season and clean seeds in the off-season. She also explains how they sell some of their own seeds during their spring seedling sales. In the deep dive, we explore growing salad turnips for seed. We start with why Shannon was looking for a Hakurei turnip alternative, then get into trialing different OP salad turnips to figure out which variety to work with, and finally we cover planting, seed harvest, and seed cleaning. We also talk about bupleurum and onions for seed. Enjoy the conversation. Hi, Shannon. Welcome to the Seed Farmer Podcast.
Hi, Dan. Thanks so much for having me.
One thing I've always admired about Bryan and you is how you've always been really intentional in how you've designed your farm and what you've done with your farm. And I mean that both in terms of the work that you physically want to do, but also how that work aligns with your values and the world you want to see. And I think it's really wonderful that you've chosen seed work as part of that intentional design. So do you want to start off telling us a bit about your farm and maybe kind of weaving in your seed story of how you came to work with seeds or just be aware of seeds?
Sure. Okay, so our farm is called Broadfork Farm, and it's a small-scale farm. It's a two-person operation, so just Bryan and I are the owners and operators. And from the beginning, we've intended for it to be a two-person operation, although always open to future scenarios where things could change, but it still has remained a two-person operation. We started the farm in 2011, and I would say since the beginning, seeds were something we were interested in. But Bryan and I met when we were both working on two different farms that were nearer to each other, and we both had our own separate farm apprentice, farm employee journey. So I had been apprenticing or working on farms for 6 years prior to starting our farm. And for both Bryan and I, we worked on farms that incorporated some seeds. And so it was always, I would say it's something that, was on our mind from the first year of starting our business. However, it fluctuates as time goes, or it looks different every year. It's not, our seed vision is the same from year to year. We don't always grow the same crops every year, but we've been really mindful that it's something that we consider to be an important skill to grow and maintain and practice. And it also, it feels fulfilling. But so I had apprenticed on farms in different places. So including in Canada and the States, but also in Central and South America and in India. And certainly not all, but many of the farms that I apprenticed or worked at had some degree of seed saving, although I didn't work on any farms that solely saved seeds as their production unit. And the reasons for different farms to save seeds were also very different. In particular, in India or Central and South America, seed access was often part of the reason. And so I guess in my time growing up as a farmer in those years, I came to learn that it didn't have to be a part of a farm, but that it made sense for it to be a part of a farm.
When you were working on those farms, did you participate in the seed harvests or cleaning, or is it just something that you saw from a distance?
I would participate to a degree. At some farms, I wasn't necessarily participating in every aspect. I guess it depends how long I was at each farm. Actually, the first farm I apprenticed at was an herb farm. And the farmer there taught me an important philosophy that I've always carried forth with me. And that he said, it's important not to only collect seeds from plants that look perfect in any given year, like not only the strongest from this year, because the ones that might have survived but not look as amazing might have the qualities within them that next year they would do well if there were different um, weather conditions, for example. And so yeah, I've always brought that lesson forward. Yeah, I thought it was really a beautiful way to see seeds. But certainly, like the seed cleaning part has been something that I've learned more and more as time has gone on. One farm that I worked at did have, I guess, like a small seed catalog that was more local based. And I was responsible for, amongst other things, growing out the seed, contribute to the seed catalog, and preparing it for sale. And so, yeah, at different farms, there was different levels of my involvement. But while I was at Everdale Farm in Ontario, that farm didn't save seeds. However, there was space for Bob Wildfong from Seeds of Diversity Canada to grow at his seed crops. And I, as like an add-on to my time there, I asked if I could work with him. And so that was a nice bonus to be able to work with Bob Wildfong while I was at Everdale.
Yeah, Bob's a wealth of information, so that is definitely a good mentor to show you some of the stuff.
Yeah.
So at this point, what does your farm look like now? Like, can you tell us about your marketing and the size and what kind of crops you're growing? Not specifically seed, like just as you're a general market farm.
Sure. So at this point, our farm, we have also been planting perennials over the years. And so the perennials take up a certain amount of space. I'm not exactly sure at this moment how much. We add perennials every year, but the annuals that we grow, so that is both certified organic vegetables and specialty cut flowers primarily, those crops make up approximately, I would say now, 3/4 of an acre. And we rotate them within a wider rotation around our farm. Our farm land is 15 acres. And so we rotate them with 3 years of cover crop and then 3 years in annual vegetables. And since we don't mostly or very rarely till the soil, having the 3 years in cover crop and then 3 years in vegetables has been useful for us, because the first year of taking a field out of cover crop into vegetables is the most challenging. And so in that year, we'll grow cucurbits on landscape fabric, which suppresses over the season first we'll mow it, but then it suppresses basically everything from wanting to grow. And it works well because as all that organic matter is breaking down, cucurbits thrive in a situation like that. That's why they like growing in compost piles, whereas other vegetables, not all vegetables, like the conditions where so much organic matter is breaking down under landscape fabric. And yeah, so our two biggest enterprises are organic vegetables and specialty cut flowers. We sell at one farmer's market, the Dieppe Market. So yeah, while our farm is located in Nova Scotia, it's in the county closest to the border with New Brunswick. And so we drive an hour away to our market. And that market is the only market we've attended since 2012. And that, along with selling to restaurants and over the years, sometimes distributors or sometimes retailers, has provided 100% of our livelihood. Yeah, so we sell direct. We also, smaller enterprises we have include selling seedlings and then selling seeds during the time that we're selling seedlings. And the seeds that we sell are both our own saved seed and also seed that we purchase in bulk, like seed that we would use, that we package up for people to sell at the farmers market or during our plant sales. But we don't. It's not a seed business, and we don't have a catalog. We wouldn't sell things online. It's basically, we consider it a similar business to the seedling sale.
Are people excited about the seeds at your market stall?
Yeah. So The reason we started selling seeds was because we've always done seedlings and we've always been really happy to sell seedlings, and it's been a successful avenue. And people would ask also for seedlings of crops that we consider to be better sown directly. So at first, what would happen is we would actually only bring the seeds that we had saved ourselves. But then people were asking, oh, can you also just bring me a little bit of can you just package up a little bit of seed for something else, carrots or cucumbers or something. And so then we would. And so as time went on, we started to do more and more. We also had started, like, this has changed now, but we were going to market earlier, like in April, especially because we had a lot of tulips. Tulips were really pushing us forward earlier on in the season, like high tunnel grown tulips. And so at that point of year, seeds, like we don't have a lot of seedlings necessarily. And so we were selling seeds, and that seemed to make a lot of sense. Now, like in the past few years, we stopped doing tulips at first just to see what it would feel like, and we might go back, but we're happy to not go back to market as early at the moment. And so we haven't been doing tulips. And so we have been thinking about that the seeds are kind of taking a back burner. Because, yeah, by the time we go back to market in May, it's less exciting than it was for people to buy them in April. But yeah, the seeds. So what we do with the seed sales at market, or we also attend One Seedy Saturday, is that we package them up like each week for the market. Sometimes there's some left over, of course, but we're not packaging up a whole bunch at once. We package them up as the sales are happening. We're not ending up with a lot.
It's kind of like comparable to if you had a couple of weeks where you sold a lot of carrot bunches, then the next week maybe you bring like a little bit more, and then you can kind of adjust it as you go along. But in this case, it would be the seeds.
Exactly. Yeah. The I guess the amount of seeds we've been bringing has expanded.
About how many varieties are you offering?
Well, we have kind of like these boards. I'm trying to picture how much would be on each board. I don't know, maybe 30 or something. And we have a new one that's we built it maybe 2 years ago, that is mostly now flowers and herbs. So the first one can now be mostly just vegetables. And most of the flowers are ones that we've saved seed of ourselves, and except for a few that are really popular, like sunflowers and zinnias. And then also there's this little sticker that was made called through the Bauta Family Initiative on Seed Security in Atlantic Canada. It's a little sticker that says Atlantic Grown on it. And in our case, any seeds that we've saved ourselves, we put the sticker on the package for the customers that would be interested in that. Although, yeah, I'm not 100% sure how big of a motivator that is for most of our market customers. And then also, all of the seeds that we sell at the market are certified organic. However, we don't label them as such, so that we don't need to add that to our certification, like the processing of packaging. So we do add our seed crops onto our organic certification, but we don't add the processing of putting them into packets and selling them onto our certification. So they don't have organic labeling.
As somebody who does have them on our certificate, I can appreciate how if you really have a focused, narrow market, it might just be easier to not worry about it. It's such a hassle, all the extra tracking that goes into that.
Yeah, so it feels for us fairly easy the way we do it. It suits us. It's easy. We're often, as time goes on, well, in some cases, you could argue that we're interested in things that are less easy, because we do have constantly an addiction to trying out new crops. But in general, we like our management to feel fairly easy and our marketing to feel easy.
How does keeping seed look like on your farm, considering that you're also producing a lot of vegetables for market? What does that look like?
Well, the actual crops that we're doing per year often change because we'll develop new interests. So I think the last time I spoke to you, we were in the midst of a multi-year, multi-pepper seed project, and we're very excited about it. But now it's been quite a few years since we've done any pepper seed saving, except for one type of hot pepper. And yeah, so that can change because we don't choose our crops with the I would say we actually don't choose a lot of our seed saving crops necessarily with the market in mind, or it's not market driven making choices. It's usually based on interest, our own personal interest. Like quite a few years ago, we identified that we wanted to figure out what were the outcomes we were hoping to achieve with seed production. And a really big one for us that has remained is just growing our skill set and having new experiences or changing up our experiences.
Are you chasing challenges? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't know if it's chasing challenges. It's just that it just doesn't feel as if we think like, okay, we always do this crop. Although there are some crops that we do save every year. It's just, because education and experience for ourselves is such a big motivation. It's quite personal. But having said that, I guess in terms of actual management on the farm, the seed crops are in the same fields as other crops for the most part. There could be instances where they might go in the midst of a perennial area. So especially, for example, if we're planting a perennial fruit crops or perennial like peony crops that take up quite a bit of space at first when they're first young, we'll usually plant certain things amongst them. And so that could be a place that a seed crop might go if we need it in a different area. But for the most part, they're just intermingled in our fields, and it's just another crop. It just happens to be a crop that stays longer than it might otherwise. For us, we've noticed that if we had a separate area just for seeds, it might not get the same attention. And so that's why it works well for us to just intermingle.
That's really interesting. I definitely understand areas of your farm that kind of not get neglected, but get forgotten a little bit. These crops that are intended for seed, are you also harvesting some of the crop for market, or are they solely a seed crop when you've chosen one?
Oh, it can be both. For example, in the last decade at least, we've been saving onion seeds every year. And lately we've been alternating, or quite a few of those years, we've been alternating between a red and then a yellow onion in each given year. And we typically actually find that not that we would sell seed this old, but that we can rely on our own seeds to last 4 years. And so, because there are certainly times that we have lost an onion seed crop. And so in that case, we're replanting the onions in the spring, and so there's nothing else that would happen to that crop. Although the first year, obviously, we are selling the majority of the crop.
So you'd be choosing the best, I don't know, 100 bulb, or I don't know how many you do, but you'd be choosing your best bulbs to then be your seed next year.
Yeah, we choose the best, but then also time chooses the best also, because by the time spring comes around, some of them may have not lasted. That's something we really love about biennial crops. There's like the chance to test them in that way, but for the most part, they store quite a long time. And then something like, well, there's actually quite a few crops that we'll harvest and then also leave it as a seed crop. I would say pretty much every year, if not every year, we save seed of our overwintering cool flower crops. And so that includes like Nigella and Bupleurum and Larkspur. Yeah. And we usually plant quite a bit, and there ends up being some that, are starting to go to seed before we can finish harvesting them all, and so then we'll just leave them.
Are those overwintered in tunnels or in the field?
These are all overwintered in the field, and we put just they're direct sown. and we cover them usually with a layer of row cover. With also, so we use as like a type of support or horizontal trellis, we use cattle panel where we curve the edges so they stand up. And we use that for some flower crops, and we also use that for some seed crops. And so that ends up being on those overwintered crops. We put it on in the fall, going into the winter, in order to not have the row cover aggravate the top of the soil surface and the seeds and the little seedlings. But then also they grow, and then with the seed crop too.
You're growing, like you're in a Canadian climate, and I'm assuming that you're getting quite a bit of snow at times. So this is not just like an overwintered crop in an empty field, for our listeners to visualize that.
No, although we have sometimes not put a row cover over top. But yeah, these cool flowers are fairly resilient. Yeah, like our winters are actually some of the most challenging for overwintering because on the East Coast here, we have a tendency towards having so many freeze and thaws. And our soil type on our farm is quite sandy. It's a sandy loam, and it's very well draining, which is beneficial. But it's very susceptible to changing weather conditions. Like it's not slow to warm up, but it's also not slow to cool down. And so our winters can be challenging, but cool flowers are often resilient and will often take risks and plant even out a late kale crop, for example, that we might want to save seed of and probably harvest some from too, that would grow as a baby crop. Some winters it might not do well, but often it does. The row cover does help though. But there have been times that we haven't used row cover and they've also succeeded. But also sometimes where we haven't used row cover and they haven't succeeded.
Have you, like through growing some of these crops, possibly multiple years, have you seen them get more adapted to these growing conditions and do better in subsequent years?
Yeah, so that is actually the other reason, or probably at this point, the main reason that we prioritize seeds is that we feel like the quality of the seeds that we save is high, whereas, potentially the highest quality that we could buy. And when I say that, I don't mean to say that it's because we're the best seed producers in the world, because we're certainly not, but because we're the only seed producers that are producing seed in our particular situation. So this is true for every seed producer or anybody saving seed. They're the only person in the world that's going to save seed for their exact soil type and climate, but also their management style and what inputs they put in and what they hope to get out of the crop, what they see as valuable in the crop. And so, yeah, for us, that's actually become the primary reason that we're now saving seeds, is that we just see the best results from the seed we save. So even just things like the way we start seeds in the spring, like we have, for example, heated benches, so bottom heat in our propagation greenhouse, but we don't have air heat, and we only have one single layer of plastic. So the air is cooler, and the base is warmer, and I think that the seeds retain that memory from the opposite conditions. Or it's also been really important for us to minimize or keep low our nitrogen inputs. And so we're really mindful of the inputs we would use for nitrogen and the rate at which they make available their nitrogen to different crops and at what stage of that crop's growth. And so with that, I think that a lot of our plants are more adapted to less nitrogen as a constantly available resource than potentially other seeds that would be out there. And every farm has this. Every farm has these unique management qualities that the plants will remember. And so, yeah, I think that every farmer would have the ability to save the best seeds for their unique conditions.
I love that you say that. I really love that. I mean, I believe it, but I love how you vocalize, and I think you've illustrated it really well. Thanks for doing that, Shannon. So earlier you mentioned how you're kind of not as much into peppers as you used to be. Does that mean that you have a stash of seeds somewhere that you're still using, or for peppers now you're relying on buying seed from other growers?
Well, yeah. So I would say we do still have a stash that we do grow out, but peppers have become less of a focus for our market crop for us currently than it used to be. And so I would say that's probably a big motivation towards having moved away from it. Yeah, so like things change a lot over time, and because even though we do sell seeds, we do consider ourselves to be our most important customer, like our own farm, our market farm, to be our most important customer for our seeds. And so the seeds we save changes a lot related to what we're interested in growing or how we want to grow. So like as an example, or as another example, we used to save lettuce seeds frequently, and they were always great, and we were very happy with doing it. However, the fact that we can't pelletize them started to make it less interesting. Because at first we were just using them for direct seeding, but we do still sometimes direct sow a mixed lettuce crop, but the majority of our mixed lettuce comes from um, from heads that we cut the bases of. And so having the pelleted seed that we're using to start seeds in the propagation greenhouse is much faster and more enjoyable.
I think that's a really good pragmatic example of decision making and setting priorities that balance, I guess, profitability in addition to all the other factors.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of situations like that in both ways. There's this crop called Bupleurum. I know that you know what it is. You had another podcast where it was brought up.
I think episode 6, perhaps.
Okay, but so that crop is interesting because a lot of flower farmers will talk about that it's quite challenging to germinate, and they'll have various techniques, like various secrets for what they do. Maybe they put it in the dark, like put a plastic bag over it for a certain amount of time and various things. And we used to have certainly not the greatest germination on it when we were purchasing seeds. But now, I mean, we've been saving seeds for a long time, and at this point, I treat it like I would a lettuce. Like I would sow it in the propagation greenhouse or even direct seeded, and I would expect them to come up very easily without any babying. And so that to us just it makes easy sense for the rest of our business.
Oh, that's fantastic. Have you done any, I don't know if maybe breeding or selection work on any of the cut flowers that you're growing in terms of the aesthetics or the appearance?
I haven't, no. It would potentially be interesting. However, the way we sell flowers is in market bouquets or in bulk buckets for weddings for the most part. There are a few times we might sell some to a florist or some to another farmer who's a farmer florist, but that is not a big part of our business. And so our market can bear a lot of diversity, and I haven't found the need at this point to yeah for to think that much about specific colors or even needing a specific size. And so it hasn't made that much sense to me to to do that work, even though I do find it very exciting, and who knows, it could be a future project. but we haven't done it.
What does your seed cleaning facilities look like?
Okay, so first, every single crop that we have, we bring into our drying room. Our climatic conditions here make it quite tricky.
Can you just describe your climatic conditions a bit, both in terms of weather, like in terms of, I guess, temperature, and in terms of humidity?
Where we're located in Nova Scotia and potentially all through the Maritimes, it can be obviously very unpredictable what our weather is going to be like in any given year. But often, historically, it's been fairly humid and quite a bit of rain. And then in particular where we live, we consider our farm site to be quite prone to frost. And so if there's, frost warnings, and most farmers in the Maritimes that we talk to wouldn't have gotten any frost, we're likely to get frost. And there's a lot of times we'll grow out a seed crop and have usually the riskiest part for us is usually the pollination period. That's the make it or break it time. If the weather is poor during that period of time, as it's maturing, obviously it's not ideal if it's super rainy, but we do have spaces that we can bring in crops for further drying. We could use greenhouses, but we also have a dedicated drying room that's attached to our house, and it's kind of like a barn loft, but it's part of our house. Is two houses stuck together. They're both old, about 200 years old, and so the older one, the upstairs, is similar to a barn loft, and we've created floor-to-ceiling shelving with screens in there, and then we'll also hang things from the rafters in either feed sacks or paper bags or in old sheets, depending on the crop. So all the time, we always are bringing in our seed crops to dry, even if they're hopefully super dry, which is always our goal. If for some reason we had to harvest when it wouldn't be dry, when the plant material wouldn't be dry, we would first put it into a greenhouse. But I would say that historically there have been challenges during those periods of maturity and then pollination. Even this year, for example, we were doing our onion crop this year is yellow onion. And something that we're doing with our yellow onions, we've only just started over the past 4 years, is that we've been growing out a diversity of yellow onions. And often the onions are pretty similar to each other. Like the yellow onions are pretty similar to each other. And so about 5 years ago, we decided to do a project where we grew out a variety of open pollinated yellow onions, and then we save the ones that we like regardless of the variety they came from, because we're kind of trying to just create some kind of landrace that comes from various genetics. And so it's an interesting project. These seeds aren't to be sold, but that's something that we're working on. But this year was a challenge because even though we had a very dry year, and for many seed crops there was benefit, especially at the maturing stage, when the onions were being pollinated, the weather was not ideal at all, and so we got quite a bit less seed than we expected. Although it's still enough, probably for at least 2 years for our own use. But it was, it was disappointing. So that pollination period is something we think about a lot, and something where we have used caterpillar tunnels to help us. But in our ideal situation, we're not growing our seed crops all under cover, even if we grow some under cover.
And the pollination is essentially like the weather conditions weren't great for pollinators. Is that what the problem was? Like maybe it's too wet, too cold?
Yeah, exactly. So then we end up with a lot of unpollinated parts of a seed head. we're both really passionate also about pollinators, and we have beehives on the farm, but we're also really focused on providing a lot of floral resources for all the wild pollinators. And we feel a big responsibility, especially because we host honeybees on the farm, that we have even more to offer for them to be able to share with the wild pollinators. And so, yeah, it's always interesting to notice the like which pollinators are moving about at certain times, but we do definitely have conditions where in that window of time there's much fewer that are interested in being out and about, or maybe being interested in that crop, I guess. But I do also, yeah, the pollination aspect and learning more about the pollinators, I consider to be an important part of our seed saving. And I think like one of the reasons that we like a large population size to save seed from, in addition, obviously, to the normal reasons like genetic diversity and being able to rogue, is that I think it would reduce cross pollination if there's a large population in one area and the bees would have to go quite far to pollinate something else, because bees prefer, or all pollinators prefer, being in the same area and getting as much pollen as they need instead of going far distances. So sometimes if there's a recommended distance of a mile for something, I think with with different, obviously, physical landscape barriers, but I also think a higher population helps reduce cross pollination.
I definitely believe that. What percent of the seed that you use on your farm comes from your own seed?
I feel like it's a small percentage. I don't know exactly. Like, we do still buy quite a bit of seeds. I feel like we're perpetually addicted to trialing and trying different things. And so, yeah, it doesn't feel like a high percentage.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we like, even though we grow a fair amount of seed and have a seed company, we still buy in the majority of the seed that we use for our market garden for probably similar reasons to you. And so I understand what you mean.
Yeah. Well, so one interesting way that we sometimes identify a seed crop that we're interested in is through our seed documentation that we need for our organic certification. We need to show that we did a seed search to see if there was organic seed available of a certain variety and prove that there wasn't the availability. And so we've added a column to that spreadsheet that's for our own use, where we think through for seed that we buy that's not organic. We think, what could we do to address the situation so that we would be reducing the amount of non-organic seed that we purchase. And so sometimes it can include saving the seed. And so that has been an interesting way that we've identified some projects that we want to work on. But it's still, it's still not a high percentage, but that does help us kind of see maybe some missing gaps that we could address.
If you're already a seed farmer, or even just thinking about harvesting seed from your plants for the first time, head over to seedgrowers.farm for my free seed grower resources. There is cross-pollination information, seed yield information, even a few seed spreadsheets. There's also a list of my favorite seed books and podcasts. While you're there, you can also sign up for my weekly newsletter to get seed grower tips and stories straight into your inbox. So head to seedgrowers.farm for my seed grower resources. Now, back to the show. So this conversation has been technical enough already, but I'd love to jump into a deeper dive into one crop. And you suggested salad turnips, and I would love to talk about salad turnips. So why don't you tell us, how you'd grow a turnip crop that's intended for seed?
Maybe I'll first start with the reason why we decided to grow that seed crop. So when for a few years, we attended the Organic Seed Alliance conference in Oregon and started to learn about the breeding technique of self-fusion. And at the time, I was also on the board of the Canadian Organic Standards Technical Committee, which is the Canadian board that creates and maintains and updates the Canadian Organic Standards. And I was also on the board of IFOAM North America. And IFOAM used to stand for the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements. However, it no longer stands for something. It's just a standalone word because it's an international organization. So it's not only an English organization. Yeah, so I started learning about self-fusion, and the fact that there was quite a few seeds that are available that market gardeners, organic farmers are using that are not labeled as such. And so Hakurei Turnips, for example, was one of the ones identified as being a product of self-fusion breeding. So I started to look more into it. And in Canada, self-fusion is an allowable breeding technique in the Canadian Organic Standards as long as the parent material comes from crops that are within the same plant family. However, in the IFOAM international standards, the recommended standard is that self-fusion is not included in organics at all. And it's interesting because, like Hakurei turnips, you can't save seed of it, and it's not because of some reasons of other seed where there'd be like a plant variety protection, or you would think, oh, it's just not going to come shoot a type. Like there's actually no seed that's produced, which we learned because we actually tried it out. Often when we hear something, I'll think, okay, I don't know for sure if it's true until I try it myself. And I did also learn a lot of stories through seed conferences and seed people where there was a hybrid that they tried and they were like, oh, it's basically stable. And so I often have found like it's good to try and see for ourselves. And so we started off actually looking for all of the salad turnip varieties that we were able to and doing a trial. A lot of our seed projects start off with trials. And even though the majority of the seeds, or almost all of the seed varieties that we found were hybrids and probably products of self-fusion, we just decided to try them all and any OPs that we were able to get.
And were you looking specifically for those white salad turnips, kind of like Hakurei? Was that the criteria you were looking for?
Yeah, basically like similar to Hakurei. Yeah, exactly. And we did include white egg in the trial. However, white egg is not really a salad turnip. It's more of a turnip that's just white. But it does end up looking like a salad turnip. So that was included in our trial.
Is that a taste thing when you say it's not a salad turnip? Is it just a little bit harsher, maybe more brassica-y than a salad turnip might be ideally?
Yeah, so when you grow them, they take much longer. They look somewhat different when they're growing. Not completely different, but there's a different quality, and they do seem more turnipy, I would say. Yeah, they don't actually, when you grow them side by side, it doesn't actually feel like white egg belongs in the trial with other salad turnips. Yeah, even though when we sell them, customers might think they look like it. But they do have definitely a more turnipy flavor, definitely a thicker skin. Although not super thick, especially at the stage people harvest them at. Like it's still a nice turnip. But so after we had grown them and harvested them, we brought a bunch of people together to do taste tests. Because one of our main interest was just, what are the different qualities that are inherent in salad turnips, or that express themselves in a salad turnip. And so it was super interesting because there was no clear winner in the salad turnip taste test. Even though side by side there were differences. Some of them were crispier, some of them were creamier. Like I consider Hakurei to be on the creamier end. Some tasted a bit more turnipy, some tasted milder. Like Hakurei, I consider milder. But some people that were doing the taste test preferred the crispier ones. They preferred the ones that had a bit more of a turnipy flavor, or kind of more of like a mustardy flavor, I guess. And so that became real. But all of them also were great. Like all of them were great, and that was really interesting for us just to think. Yeah, there's different people with different tastes, and these are all great tasting. The only OP that we were really that we were able to get was Tokyo Market. And Tokyo Market is often challenging to get, challenging to source. Like the High Mowing catalog often has it, but often it will either be in limited amounts or unavailable. Like this year, for example, their catalog says Tokyo Market's unavailable for 2026. And so it seemed like both philosophically with the cell fusion breeding techniques and thinking like even though it's allowed in Canadian organic standards, it wouldn't be allowed in the internationally recommended breeding standards. And IFOAM has a position paper on different breeding techniques, which is really interesting that you can download online for free. But so we felt philosophically like we're not that interested in always relying on this breeding technique, and also it's rarely available to get Tokyo Market seed. So this is a great crop for us. But we're still not at the point of being able to be self-sufficient in our own Tokyo Market seed production, because we do grow a lot of salad turnips. So yeah, what we do basically is, well, what we have done and what we might change, we have our first sowing of Tokyo Market salad turnip in the early spring. We would harvest and select out at least 80, but probably more single turnips, and the rest. And we're doing the selection as we're bunching in our wash station. So we rarely bunch in our field. We mostly harvest crops and bring them into our wash station and bunch them there. And that started because our farm tends to have a lot of black flies.
Oh.
And then we just became used to it. So we select while we're bunching, and then we store them. We store the selected turnips in our cooler for about 6 weeks to simulate a winter season. And then we bring them out and we replant them. And then they'll go to seed. And usually with salad turnips or other like Brassica rapa, we usually harvest it as stalks. So we're harvesting it low on the plant, but leaving plant material certainly in the ground, and also not taking excess leaves or things like that. And we'll harvest them into either a tarp or a bed sheet. And we always so we'll put them into our drying room, and we personally, based on our schedule, tend to do our seed cleaning in the winter. That's our favorite time. The only time we do seed cleaning earlier is usually if we need to, or if we're planning to sell the seed to another seed company.
So you have a loft right now full of seed to be threshed and cleaned.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a nice winter project.
Yeah. This fall we did go to a seed cleaning day at Broadfork Farm in the Valley of Nova Scotia. It is a fair drive for us, and we only brought a few seed crops, but it all went so quickly. She has quite a bit of seed cleaning equipment that's different than ours, and we thought, maybe in the future we would take more of our seed earlier on, like maybe all of our seed, to staff to seed clean there, and that could help us finish it sooner. But at the moment, most of our seeds are in the drying room. and we have an attached greenhouse to that part of the house. And so in the winter, we can be in there, yeah, preparing some of the seed for cleaning. A lot of our seed goes through our real seed cleaner, also known as the zigzag cleaner. And then some seeds we would just clean with seed cleaning screens.
I want to go back to something you said about the turnips. So you're growing them as a spring crop, then you're taking them, you're putting them in the cold room to simulate vernalization, and then you're planting them back in the field. When are you getting them back in the field about?
I guess it would be in July.
And when are they going, like, when are you harvesting the seed off of them? Is that like mid-September, early October?
Yeah, probably around October, maybe September. We do tend to, unlike most of our other seed crops, we do tend to, that one we're getting earlier in its stage of maturity. And so for a lot of other seed crops that we do, we tend to be harvesting where some might have fallen onto the soil already. That one, it does tend to be a little bit earlier. And we're also thinking about moving to, or maybe in addition, doing a fall harvest of larger roots. We do also grow salad turnips into a bit of a larger crop late in the fall. And that way they would overwinter, and we would have that great selection that time in the winter offers for storability. And then having a larger root would both produce more crops but also, I think, take more time to produce seed versus the smaller size roots that we're replanting. I think because they're smaller, I think they don't spend as much time to get to that seed crop because they're not making as much leaf matter first.
They bolt a little bit early, like sometimes, like when you have radishes or something too dense or a really rough. I know what you mean. Just something bolts extra early and it makes a spindly little plant as opposed to if it was a bigger one.
Yeah, I mean, I do find like that they are good sized plants, but definitely they could be more robust.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put down your turnip plants. I realize it may have come off that way. That wasn't the intention.
No, I didn't think that's what you meant. I just meant that surprisingly, for such a small root, the plants are not as spindly as you might think. We've done the same with radishes, like harvesting the radishes at the same time that we'd be harvesting for ourselves and then replanting them. Radishes is something we've become less interested in saving seed from because the actual seeds per pod tend to be, we haven't found that we're getting a lot of yield per pod, but it could be a variety thing. There might be varieties out there that produce more seed.
I think radishes do have less seed per pod than other brassicas. They're also a bit more irritating to clean, but might be a lot of, depending on your plant, there could be a lot of pods, so they could offset.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, we grow spring radishes kind of the same way as you're talking about turnips. We've never tried turnips that way, but I find that spring radishes don't need as much vernalization as I would imagine turnips do to then bolt. Like sometimes radishes just feel like they want to bolt, whatever you do.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I haven't found it a challenge with salad turnips, but it might be more challenging with the white egg. Like we haven't actually tried to save seed of the white egg. But it does have a different, it is a different type of, like it has a different feeling. And so it could be like many other turnips that are adapted to being storage crops, you know. It could, all the rutabaga or carrots, they might need a longer period of time. But the salad turnips, yeah, like haven't been challenged with the method that we're using. Although I agree, like I've never ended up with a salad turnip crop that was like accidentally bolting, like you might with a radish that's under stress.
Is there anything else you want to add about salad turnips before we pivot into wrap-up questions?
I don't think so.
So Shannon, What would you tell your younger seed-growing self?
Well, in particular, this might be only specific to me, but I was really passionate about my apprenticeship years. And um, often when I think back to myself at that time, I think, oh, it would have been so nice to apprentice on that farm or this farm. And so I think I do I do wish, looking back, that I could have decided to apprentice on a farm that actually only did seeds. Um, that was like a seed farm, just to see how their season looks and how it's different. And I think it would have been nice to focus solely on seeds. Yeah, I'm not sure if I would tell every younger person that, but would be something that I would love to whisper to my former self.
And what would you say to market growers to inspire them to start growing seed?
Well, okay, if a market grower has no interest right now in adding on something like seed, I would still say that it would be valuable to try and learn, especially in some kind of environment like a seed conference, as an investment in your knowledge about a pretty important input on your farm. Like, in my opinion, not knowing about the seed industry when my business requires seeds is pretty similar to like not knowing anything about um, food production as an eater, or not knowing anything about the seasons as somebody who wants to eat locally. Um, yeah, I think it's a big gap in information when we don't understand things about the seed sector. And there have been so many inspiring things I've learned um, about, like, through seed producers and through learning from people who are passionate about seed, that have helped other aspects of our farm. Like, for example, learning about what diseases can get passed to the seed, or that might show up because they were seed borne, or understanding more about like traits, like what I might see in my crops, and how to improve them. And maybe it's varietal, maybe it's based on that I chose the wrong variety, but it could be because of some other management technique. And so understanding just the expression of different varieties, or even understanding why I might choose an open pollinated seed or a hybrid seed. I think some market growers just have this idea that hybrids just mean improved and always are better. And they might not realize that, some open pollinated varieties that they've trialed, if they didn't like it, it could be related to that variety not being maintained to their expectations. Or it could be something that even just with one season of seed saving could could be improved. Like, sometimes I hear people talking about a variety, even, and they would say, "Oh, the germination on that wasn't very good," and isn't that really isn't about that variety, even if it makes them feel that that variety isn't worth it for them. And so, just learning more about this massive input. Um, and I also think that if a person attends seed conferences or seed workshops within other farming conferences, or seed webinars, or attends anything that where there's other passionate seeds people, I don't think that they can help but come away thinking, I want to at least do trials, or I want to save a little bit of seed, because it's just so exciting and inspiring.
It's very contagious.
Yeah, very contagious.
Is there something that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I can't think of something that you shouldn't have asked me, but I do have something that I would like to discuss with you.
Okay.
There's this idea, yeah, there's this idea that I read about quite a few years ago in a book called The Manual of Seed Saving. I'm not sure if you have it. It's by Andrea Heistiger. I think it's from the UK. And there's a section in it that refers to older books related to seed saving, talking about seeds that were older, producing more yield. And so in particular, it referenced cucumbers and melons, and the idea that 3-year-old or 6-year-old seed would produce a higher percentage of fruit than a plant grown from seed that was 1 year or 2 years old. And when I first read it, I was like, I don't understand this at all. This is, and I still don't understand it. But it's constantly been in my mind as a curious question. And I've thought over the years of things like maybe it's similar to how, when a tree gets really old, often it will produce a large amount of seed to kind of pass on its genetic wealth. Like an apple tree or a pine tree. This is very old often will do that kind of as its last gasp. Or even people talk about, older laying hens kind of like soon before they might perish, they would produce like a large amount of eggs that they hadn't been producing that amount for a long time. And so it got me wondering, I wonder if it's similar to that. But I'm not sure. And so I've never actually done trials on this, but I do think it's interesting. And I wondered if you had thoughts or experience with that.
So I haven't read this book, though it sounds great, and I haven't heard about this. I have heard about, in the case of not brassicas, in cucurbits, that sometimes a little bit older cucurbits can germinate better than younger cucurbits, because seeds are living things, and there are still, so I feel like I'm not going to use the right words, but there's still stuff going on in the seed to keep it maturing. And so for some crops, a couple years in, the seed might germinate better than at harvest. And we've definitely seen that with some crops. And now there's some cases that's just a dormancy, like with lettuce seed, if it gets too hot, it can go into dormancy for 4 or 5 months. But other crops, I think it might just be that the seed is still maturing afterwards. Though that is a bit of a different thing than what you're describing. I do question it a little bit. And it can be something very hard to evaluate from a garden or farmer perspective, because like if you were to grow 2 rows side by side, one from year-old seed and one from 6-year-old seed, and one did better than the other one, if you just had those 2 rows to go on, it could be differences in fertility, it could be differences in irrigation. So you'd really need to have a replicated trial to see whether that works. And now, I know there's a lot of wisdom that folks have had without replicated trials for millennia. But I think there's also sometimes mixed in can be stories. And I don't know where this one goes, but it's definitely something I'm curious about. And I might ask, a squashy type person about it at some point in the future.
Yeah, I found it something that I've been pondering for a while. And yeah, I've asked other people, but I have yet to experiment with the idea myself. There's also something that I've recently been thinking about, and it was based on listening to one of your podcasts with Helen of Helen Skiba, where she was talking about growing out buplarum, which is something that we've done for a long time as well. And she mentioned that the seed viability doesn't necessarily last for her more than 1 season or maybe 2, which is very different from my experience. I usually find that, like this year, for example, I sowed for my winter overwintering crops. The seed was from 2021, and I didn't feel like that was old seed, for example. And so it made me wonder about it just being related to her dry weather conditions.
Because I think she's in Colorado.
Yeah. And we have very typically less, not very dry conditions, even though our soils are very well draining and we do have irrigation. But it made me curious to think about the seeds that I've saved this year where we had a drought. And yeah, whether it's just, like that the seed wasn't able to build itself enough stores for multiple years compared to normal. I Yeah, it started me thinking about the water that our plants have access to and the effect on the seeds and the viability and what that might look like in a season like we had this year. And I'd never really spent that much time thinking about that until she brought that up. And so that was a really valuable podcast for me.
Yeah, in my experience, seeds definitely have different vintages. That some years give you better lots than others, and for some things like a brassica seed, it almost doesn't matter. But with peppers especially, when I was a newer seed grower, it felt like a lot of my pepper seed was storing for 2 or 3 years. And 3 years was a long time. And then I had a few lots that lasted like 7 or 8 years, and then went through a phase where they were storing longer, and I thought maybe I just become a better seed grower. But recently, I've had not more, but a few lots, too many for my tastes, but of lots that have acted more like they did when I was a newer seed grower, and that, after 2 years, the germ really fell off. And so sometimes there's stuff that when we harvest it, and something that can also be parts of the actual growing year. So yeah, I do know there was one pepper seed lot that we had sold to somebody, another seed company, and they were just ranting about it. Like, this is early on, ranting about it, how they still had it years later and it was still good, and they were really impressed with that. I think that's a really interesting reflection about the vintages, and that just that the advantage. When you were starting to talk about this, I did wonder whether the growing conditions might make a difference. Often we're on the being in a more humid climate, we're on the bad side of seed growing, but maybe there's some benefits. One other thing along that line that I wanted to pick up on was earlier when you were talking about onions, and you mentioned that you've had seed that's lasted 4 years and still been good. And that's been my experience when I've grown onion seeds. And there's definitely a story that circulates that you shouldn't use 2-year-old seed. But I think that might be from when you buy it from a seed company. It's not this year's crop, and the way it's harvested, sometimes it's not even last year's crop. It might be already 2 years old by the time it gets to you, and onions can be very sensitive, or the seed is fragile, maybe is a better way to put it, and I think they can be damaged in harvest. So if it's a little bit old, and if it's harvested maybe mechanically, it might not do as well as something that was harvested, I'm going to say with love, but I mean like with care by hands, might do better. So there's a lot of things that can go into seed quality that have an impact.
Yeah. Actually, one of a big important thing that for us was we were selling you onion seed, but the germination wasn't great. And you suggested we clean it with water. And we hadn't ever done that with a dry seed crop. And we did it, and it worked great. And ever since then, we haven't had too many other situations like that, but we often think about that as, a great tip in our back pocket to let water show us which seed is.
Can you describe what you mean by cleaning with water?
Yeah. So after we clean the seed to what we consider is clean, what seems clean through our seed cleaning machine, then we poured it into water and we poured water into the container of the cleaned onion seed, and then would be heavier than others, and so then we flushed out any that were lighter weight, and so we were only left with the heaviest seed, and then we let it further dry, or dry out completely again. And yeah, that was such an important tip for us.
I'm glad it worked.
And it didn't affect the longevity of the seed either, which I think we were concerned about. But it was very momentary that the seed was wet, and so yeah, it was a really important tip for us. One thing I also often think about, and I think this is definitely from learning more about seed through, like, just through seed education, that's valuable for market growers to know, is that typically seed producers will produce seed like stock seed, which is what they'll resave seed from or store for longer for sowing their seed to produce more seed. And so even us, when we're cleaning our seed, not for every crop, but often we'll size the seed just naturally through the seed cleaner. And so the smallest seed, we often will feel like, okay, we should use this up sooner. It has less storage energy in it. But that's an interesting way that we get what I consider a higher quality seed. Because I think, like, okay, when I'm buying seed from a large seed company, I'm probably getting smaller seed, like the lesser grade in a way, or a seed that would probably last less long.
So some things aren't sized, like something like a brassica seed,
Right.
It tends to be
Yeah.
the size. But if you talk about spinach or chard, those are definitely going to be sized by either the grower or somewhere in the middle, and different grades will go to different markets. And it could be a hassle when you grow your own of some of those crops because they might not be as uniform if you're using a vacuum seeder. But for a lot of market growers, you can work around that diversity of size. But you're right. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know about behind the scenes that has an impact on our crop.
Yeah. Well, even for my bupleurum seed, I usually have not always, but sometimes 3 grades, sometimes 2 grades of size that just naturally happen through the cleaning process. So, and then it does make it easier for your seeder to have an easier, or for me, in my case, I also think of it in terms of smaller seed. I think I should use it up first compared to the larger size seed. Yeah.
So, Shannon, how can people find out more about what you're doing?
Well, we have a website. It's broadforkfarm.com. I have created a lot of blog posts there, especially in the past. We have a Facebook page and an Instagram page. They're not as active as they used to be. I have moved away from as much social media presence as I used to. Mostly after 2020, I saw the movie Social Dilemma, and I started to question.
You started to have a social dilemma?
Yeah, or just think like, oh, I'm offering so much information. It's nice to offer to humans, but I'm offering a lot just to social media platforms. And I've stepped away, and I think maybe based on the, how our like the length of time we've been in business, it didn't actually affect our marketing like I thought it could. So yeah, there's not as much information as there used to be, but all that information is still available if you scroll back.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It's been a great conversation, and it's been nice to catch up.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable for me too. I think this is a great podcast that you've been creating. Thank you for sharing all the stories.
And that's episode 51 of the Seed Farmer Podcast. Thank you, Shannon, for being on the podcast. It was great to catch up and hear about all the seed work you're up to. Thank you to Sophia Sedalton for the theme music. You can hear more of their music at sophiasedalton.com. Thank you to Molly Brisebois for editing this episode, and thank you so much for joining me in these conversations with seed farmers. You can find more seed growing resources on my blog at seedgrowers.farm. While you're there, you can subscribe to my newsletter full of seed growing, crop planning, and farm spreadsheets. You can also find out where to order a copy of my book, The Seed Farmer, a complete guide to growing, using, and selling your own seed. And you can support the podcast at spreadsheet.farm/support-podcast or follow the link in the show notes. If you haven't already subscribed to this podcast, now's the time. You wouldn't want to miss the next episode. Until then, happy farming.